What's up, Buttercup? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and I am 90% booktuber and 10% author tuber. And for today's video, I'm going to talk about what are the differences between soft fantasy and hard fantasy, which I know there are a lot of readers and writers that are confused about those two types of fantasy and what they mean, some examples, and I'm here for you. So though this is aimed mainly at writers, if you're interested as a reader to get down to the nitty-gritty of things, I've got your back. Starting off with soft fantasy. It is set in our known real world and expected to take in the magic that's not very in-depth or explained extremely well as just being present in everyday life. Authors of soft fantasy intertwine the real world mundane with the whimsical magic. Soft fantasy is often, but not always, set in cities or towns. Examples of soft fantasy categories are urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy, paranormal romance, and paranormal women's fiction. Examples of books and authors that write soft fantasy are the Sookie Stackhouse book series by Charlene Harris, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, the Inkworld series by Cornelia Funk, just to name a few popular ones. Now, hard fantasy is way more complex because you are creating your own universe that involves a unique magic system and rules. Often writers will come up with their own languages, not just one, but multiple languages within this world. New religions and or spiritual beliefs, specific styles of clothing and how they are made, naming conventions for people, other beings, places, things, what societies and cultures look like, and how they operate, so on and so forth. And this is all centered around magic and the mythical beings and creatures that inhabit this world. You are basically creating a whole new universe as if it were real. You also see a lot of other beings that are already established, like elves, griffins, mermaids, vampires, goblins, mages, etc. But many writers create brand new other beings too. High fantasy usually, but not always, as fantasy progresses, is inspired by medieval Europe and therefore has a basis in myths and legends from various European countries. The categories that are high fantasy are obviously the epic fantasy category, but also grimdark and sword and sorcery. Popular high fantasy books and authors are the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin, The Lord of the Rings, the creator of high fantasy, really to be precise, aka J.R.R. Tolkien, any books by Brandon Sanderson, and the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. There's some debate over earlier works of fantasy about what would be considered soft fantasy versus hard fantasy. Some argue, for example, that The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle is soft fantasy, as it was among older fantasy books and writers right after Tolkien popped up, that the early writers and originators of the fantasy genre as we know it today, and therefore they were establishing fantasy. So it's a bit harder for earlier works of fantasy novels as a whole to be neatly placed into a box of soft fantasy or hard fantasy. But since the fantasy genre is more established in the 21st century, it's now much easier to label if the writer's writing to market and or knows their market and has a clear understanding and writing plan in place of where their fantasy world lies, either soft or hard fantasy. Even if they're a pantser, aka they don't outline. It's doable to write hard fantasy and soft fantasy because there's always the editing phase. If you're being professional about it. Let's just assume that you are doing the editing phase, but you're not sure where your fantasy book lies, soft fantasy or hard fantasy. You would have to do a little bit more research on where you want to fall, or even if you want to, though readers and their expectations do fall in line with some prefer soft fantasy and others prefer hard fantasy. So it is best overall to pick one or the other and not necessarily have an uphill battle of marketing that book. But of course, it's always up to you. Thank you so much for watching my video on the differences between soft fantasy and hard fantasy. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this topic, leave them in the comment section below and I will try to answer any and all of your questions as best I can. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!